question of democracy consistently began to pester me, and suddenly 9/11 happened and world's powerful democracy was like attacked by non-state actors. And then subsequently, you see in 2005, Nepalese monarchy fell because of internal insurgency. And there was a flurry of events. And ironically, Bhutan and Pakistan became democracies in 2008. And in 2008, or even before that, in 2005, when Nepalese democracy fell. So I called it as democratic paralysis because at that time, still Musharraf was in power in Pakistan and also in Afghanistan. Like the entire thing was in doldrums because there was a minor or a faint hint towards the resurgence of Taliban, and US was also in a mood to talk to the Taliban in terms of what they called as the good Taliban and the bad Taliban. And then suddenly Iraq also happened in 2003. These events did not happen in a same year, but it happened in what we can call as a simultaneous temporary parallel. There was a simultaneity and there was a temporary parallel around which all these things were happening. And I pondered, democracy failed in South Asia. That was my first conclusion. But to my surprise, Bhutan became democracy, and we all felt that US had succeeded in consolidating democracy in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We could not imagine that suddenly Musharraf gave up and it became a democracy. So there was democracy, and suddenly I started writing on whether democracy succeeded, but modernity must have failed. Suddenly my question became different, feeling that, okay, democracy succeeded, but not modernity. One of the most important attributes of modernity is democracy. So do we have successful democracy? Then I framed this term, half-baked modernity syndrome in South Asia. That led me to think Pakistan is now a democracy, Bhutan is now a democracy. So how all these things will turn out? And suddenly Sri Lanka's civil war was crushed by the Sri Lankan military. And then again, I started doubting the credibility of democracy in this region. Now, all these things again put questions on the credentials of democracy. Now, simultaneously, the question on modernity kept on pestering me. So there were three key issues that kept on influencing me. One was the question on modernity. Second one, whether deterrence succeeded. The third question, still unresolved for me, the whole question on modernity. But yeah, I am still today, if anybody asks India-Pakistan subconventional war, of course, what I tend to argue was, even after nuclearization, India-Pakistan subconventional war kept on happening. And the vantage point, like epistemological vantage point that I take in this book is from 1989, where, there was democracy after General Zia, but there was a cry for Azadi in Kashmir. Pakistan vehemently supported it. Kargil happened. 2008 happened. Ironically, Pakistan has 3 successful democratic experiments without any failure, 2008 till now. Of course, Imran Khan could not complete his term, but my book is still what Imran Khan did till in his tenure. But the whole idea was to look at the failure of modernity and to link it to the failure of deterrence. This is the way in which I was looking to argue in terms of the critique of the liberal peace model. What this book offers actually 3 different things, which I think that is the USP of this book. Number one is, like, as I said, the question as to whether India-Pakistan subconventional war is a failure of modernity, because the advent of modernity itself is not indigenous, but colonially transmitted. Although we agree that Europe can be provincialized, but there is a discontent that I show in the second and third chapter of this book. Even if we say that we want to provincialize Europe and agree that nationalism is our derivative discourse, but both counts we have failed. Secondly, if India-Pakistan subconventional war is so important because what I argue in this book is largely we need to understand the failure of modernity and a democratic peace hypothesis in South Asia. Largely, democratic peace thesis is constructed, the neo-Kantian idea of democratic peace thesis is constructed around the idea of war, which is a conventional war. But India-Pakistan relations has seen subconventional wars when maybe India and Pakistan both, of course, India has always been a democracy. Maybe 1965, Ayub Khan, a military dictator. 71, there was a democratic mandate, but was like completely pummeled by Yahya Khan. 1999 is one crucial example where both India and Pakistan had democracies. Of course, India had a caretaker government, but it was democratic. So there is no question that whether India has a democracy or not. But my argument here is, despite having democracy, India-Pakistan fights. So empirically, even if India and Pakistan are not fighting a battle like 1965 or 71, but there is an everyday battle, which is a subconventional war, and the militaries of both the countries are equally involved. India is involved in defending and Pakistan is involved with its non-state actors. The military regulars are involved in planning and execution. So it's a military conflict of a sort. So I tried to redefine the idea of war itself for the democratic peace thesis in the 4th chapter, where I say that war only in terms of two regular armies fighting, no. But the subconventional war also involves complete policy makers as well as the strategists and the armies and the air force. I agree that democracy and modern institutions succeeded comparatively better in India, but I assigned responsibility of the failure of democracy in a way. Maybe Pakistan is a bigger failure, but India is also not a grand success. Where I use these two theoretical paradigms, the legitimation crisis of Habermas and political decay, the notion of political decay of Samuel Huntington. Now, why I use this? Quite an old concept, but it's very relevant to understand both India and Pakistan, especially Pakistan. Now, political decay, obviously, the social modernization consistently happened in Pakistan. Industries came, media came, and Musharraf also democratized media and everything came. But political modernization did not happen because the bureaucracy, army, and political parties did not cope up to the modern institutions. So that is the lag, that is the political decay. Similarly, in India also, we still see I actually gave example of the local level bureaucracy, the district level and the divisional mandal level bureaucracy. Caste hierarchy still play a significant role, and I have brought in the works of Barbara Harris White, Akhil Gupta, Red Tape, Sarah Joseph, and others to prove this. The very idea of political decay in India is the way in which caste hierarchies still persist. And in Pakistan, of course, the way in which democratic institutions failed, despite industrial wealth increasing. Both countries. Now, the legitimation crisis, of course, the very idea of people not having faith on legal institutions, of course, in India, that is not much of the case because we still have the courts and other institutions functioning brilliantly. But in Pakistan, Musharraf writes in his book, people still go to the army to rescue. The prime minister is corrupt, people will go to the army general and say that, okay, our prime minister is corrupt. Now, this is where the legitimation crisis happens. So, in that sense, both India and Pakistan have confronted crisis in terms of negotiating with the idea of modernity. Of course, even if you take modernity in terms of what Weber and Marx actually tell us about, or Anthony Giddens, of course, the whole idea of intersubjectivity which Anthony Giddens brings in. Now there lies the problem. Instrumentally, in terms of what Max Weber and Karl Marx argues, modernity in India and Pakistan consistently succeeded. But what about intersubjectivity? Really, have we done away with caste hierarchies in India? No. And in Pakistan, this whole idea of neoliberal reforms, and what Habermas said, it is a product of neoliberal reforms. And even today, we can bring in statistics given by many research agencies. Inequalities based on caste, income inequalities based on caste has exponentially increased in terms of even after neoliberal reforms. And what happened to Pakistan was the rise of Islamic fundamentalism after neoliberal reforms. The wealth generated out of neoliberal reforms since the 1980s supported the agencies like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat-ud-Dawa and other agencies. So India, of course, has done better, but still we have feudalism and caste. These are the two factors that I discuss in my third chapter of the book. This book makes the readers introspect on the idea of modernity for a region like South Asia, and whether modernity or its failed acceptance or its failed management, how it affects conflicts, the rise of conflicts. Normally, modernity and conflicts are interconnected with each other, but it's largely the literature is existing in terms of the internal conflicts, social conflicts in a particular society. But international conflicts as a product of modernity and democracy, this is what the Eurocentric grand theories have not told us, because largely postmodern states which are completely modern, having legitimate authority, no wars will happen. This is what people like Barry Buzan will argue, keeping the example of European Union. But what we argue, especially I argue in this book, is even after modernity and 75 years of democratic experiment and nuclearization, which supported the West to negate wars, but democratization, nuclearization, and modernity contributed to the intensification of conflicts rather than mitigating them. This is what I